The wind howled across Cherry Hill, tearing through the naked maple trees like a chorus of ghosts. Sarah Thompson stood alone at her frosted kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, watching the snow fall with the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago how to wait. Hope Haven, once bustling with mill workers and patriotic bunting, now lay still, a forgotten town, swallowed by cold and time. The old house creaked as if trying to speak, its flaking white paint and sagging porch, bearing witness to better days. Inside every wall was a gallery of memory photos of a young nurse in Vietnam, a happy family on a boat, a grainy clipping of the hurricane that had taken them all away. Her daughter, son-in-law, 2 grandchildren, gone in one cruel wave. That was when the town stopped calling, stopped inviting. Grief had made Sarah a ghost long before the years had. Outside the porch, light flickered. She almost missed the sudden motion in the snow. A shadow, no something more deliberate, hurt, halting. Her nursing instinct snapped awake. Grabbing her wool coat and flashlight, Sarah stepped into the storm without hesitation. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she followed the crimson dots staining the drifts. Then she saw him collapsed against the garden shed, massive and still. A German shepherd, though calling him just a dog felt wrong. His fur, once pure white, was smeared with blood and ice. His eyes, deep gold brown, met hers with silent recognition, not fear. As if he'd been waiting for her. "Oh, you poor thing," Sarah whispered. "Let's get you warm." The dog didn't resist as she knelt, even as his sides trembled with pain and cold. Around his thick neck, her flashlight caught a glint of metal. Not an ordinary collar, military tags, scratched and nearly unreadable. 2 words remained: Operation Guardian. A gust nearly knocked her over. The dog tried to rise, then collapsed with a whimper that cracked her heart wide open. She stripped off her coat and wrapped it around him. "Come on, soldier," she murmured. "You're coming home." Getting him inside was like guiding a snow-drenched statue. He was massive, heavy with muscle and exhaustion, yet he leaned on her gently, as if careful not to burden her frail frame. The side ramp, built after her hip surgery, proved a blessing. Step by icy step, she led him into the warmth of her kitchen. Under the yellow glow of the overhead light, the truth of his condition emerged. Gashes on his flank, a paw swollen and raw, and beneath them older scars. He had survived things no creature should. Sarah's hands, though, weathered with age, moved with practiced precision. She warmed blankets in the dryer, sterilized gauze, boiled saline. All the while he watched her eyes, never blinking posture calm. When she reached for antiseptic, he didn't flinch. "You've had this before," she murmured. "You were trained for pain." As she cleaned his wounds, she turned over the tags again. Operation Guardian. Below it, almost erased, was a date 2 years ago. And beneath that, as if someone had deliberately tried to scratch it out, a string of numbers. The wind rattled the windows. His ears perked. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Sarah followed his gaze to the dark kitchen window. Nothing but snow. "It's just the storm," she said softly. But something in her bones told her it wasn't. That night she dozed beside him in her armchair, wrapped in a quilt, fingers resting on his back. Every time she stirred, she found him awake, always alert, always scanning. By morning, he had eaten the chicken she offered from her hand and drank water steadily. His fever had broken. His eyes, though still tired, held something new: trust. "You need a name," she whispered, running her fingers through the white fur between his ears. "How about Kajani? It means warrior." His ear twitched, and for the briefest moment, Sarah swore he smiled. 3 days passed. The blizzard raged outside, but inside the old Victorian time softened. Sarah spoke to him as she changed his bandages, telling stories of her past, her daughter, her loneliness. Kajani listened, really listened. And when she fell silent, he lay beside her with his head on her knee, as if reminding her she wasn't alone anymore. In the hush of a dying town, an old widow and a battered war dog had found each other not by accident, but as if fate had drawn a line through snow and sorrow and said, "Here." This is where healing begins. February cast long blue shadows across Hope Haven. The snowbanks piled high, muffling the world in silence. Sarah, bundled in layers, stepped cautiously down her porch steps. Beside her, Kajani moved like a phantom, silent, graceful, always attuned to her pace. He adjusted his stride to match hers, offering a steady presence each time her breath came shorter than it used to. In the weeks since the blizzard, their bond had deepened into something unspoken. Kajani was no ordinary dog. He responded to hand signals Sarah barely remembered from her time volunteering with Army medics, stop, follow, guard. When she raised her hand to still him, he froze. When she pointed toward the hallway, he moved ahead, checking corners with practiced awareness. It was like living with a retired soldier. But the town noticed. On their first outing to refill Sarah's medication at Wilson's pharmacy, the streets felt colder, despite the sun. Children stopped playing to stare. Conversations paused mid-sentence as the massive white shepherd passed by. Inside the shop, old Mrs. Wilson dropped her glasses when she looked up. "Good Lord, Sarah Thompson. That's not a dog, that's a polar bear," she gasped, clutching her chest. "Is it safe?" Before Sarah could answer, a young boy, Tommy Peterson, burst through the door and slipped on the tile. Kajani moved in a blink, positioning himself between the boy and a shelf of glass jars. Tommy bounced harmlessly off Kajani's side. "Cool dog," he shouted, laughing. The incident diffused the tension, but not the whispers. That afternoon, the town gossip mill came alive. Sarah could feel it, eyes on her, from behind lace curtains, judgment, wrapped in concern. Margaret Baker from the town council cornered her by the post office. "There are rules," dear Margaret said with syrupy condescension. "Dangerous animals. Augusta has a shelter." "Kajani stays with me," Sarah interrupted. Her voice was calm, but it cut like steel. "He's registered, and he's protected." A small lie. But the tags around Kajani's neck were real, and Sarah had begun to suspect they carried weight beyond city ordinances. That evening, Dr. James Mitchell arrived unannounced, shaking snow from his coat, as Kajani studied him from the hallway. Not hostile, just assessing. Sarah smiled as the tension faded from Kajani's stance. "He knows you're one of the good ones," she said, handing James a steaming mug. He sat down slowly. "I heard about the incident at Wilson's, and the gossip." "They can talk," Sarah replied, her voice even. "He's done more good for this town in 2 weeks than most have in years." James hesitated, eyes fixed on Kajani. "That's not why I came." She stiffened. Years of nursing told her when a doctor wore his professional mask. He pulled out a manila envelope, quietly setting it on the table. "The scans came back. It's spreading faster than we expected. 6 months, maybe less." The silence between them crackled like static. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She reached down instead, laying a hand on Kajani's back. He leaned against her leg in that same quiet, steady way he had since the first night. "I don't feel alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." In the weeks that followed, Kajani seemed to sense everything before it happened. He brought her medication before she realized she needed it. Positioned himself on her left side when dizziness came. kept vigil by the bathroom door when her coughing fits grew worse. He was more than a pet. He was a partner. But Sarah wasn't the only one watching. Margaret Baker's faction on the town council grew louder. Zoning letters arrived warnings about Sarah's unsuitable property. Rumors swirled about military experiments about Kajani's violent past. Sarah ignored them all, and yet, change bloomed in quieter corners. Ellen Peterson, mother to little Tommy, knocked on Sarah's door one chilly afternoon. She held a pot of soup and a small box of dog treats. "Tommy made these for him," she said, voice hesitant. "I wasn't sure if... people are saying things." Kajani walked to the door, slow and careful, and sat in front of Tommy with perfect posture. The boy offered the treat. Kajani took it with a gentle mouth and a wag of his tail. "He's not what they say, is he?" Ellen asked, as Sarah poured tea in the kitchen. "No," Sarah said softly. "He's more than they'll ever understand." Outside the porch, light flickered again, but this time it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like something returning. March crept in with frozen breath, and rumors carried on the wind. Sarah's steps grew slower, her cough more persistent. But each morning she still rose with purpose. Fed Kajani, checked the porch light, brewed her tea. Kajani stayed close, always watching, always ready. His loyalty never wavered. Dr. Mitchell visited with news more troubling than lab results. "They've leased the old Miller warehouse," he said, rubbing his temple. "Private security firm. Not local. Not normal." Kajani, seated by the window, lifted his head. His ears twitched. "They say they're here for land surveying," James continued. "But their vehicles. I've seen them near your street." Sarah didn't answer. She walked over to the fireplace, lifted Kajani's tags, and rubbed her thumb across the worn letters. Operation Guardian. Later that night, she sat by the fire, coughing into a blanket. Kajani rested his head in her lap, his gaze never leaving the door. Sarah ran her hand through his thick fur. "You didn't just wander here, did you?" she said aloud. "You were running from something or someone." Kajani closed his eyes, but didn't move. He didn't have to. She understood now. When Sheriff Anderson arrived the next day, his cruiser crunching up her driveway, Sarah was already waiting on the porch. "Some folks from the DOD came asking questions," he said, staying carefully on the steps. "Looking for a missing military asset. Didn't name you directly, but they mentioned an unusual dog. Said someone at the gas station saw him." Sarah didn't blink. "Did they show you credentials?" "Nope. Just questions and a black SUV." Kajani stood behind her, silent as a ghost. "Be careful, Sarah," the sheriff said. "Town's changing. Can't trust everyone like we used to." That night, James returned with a folder full of classified printouts, redacted reports, blurry documents. "Operation Guardian," he whispered, pointing to one partially visible insignia. "A military canine unit, supposedly decommissioned after something went wrong." He hesitated. They weren't supposed to survive. Kajani sat beside Sarah, unmoving, regal. "He did," she said. "And now they want him back." James's voice dropped. "You should give this to someone who can protect you." Sarah placed a hand over the journal she had started keeping, filled with observations, sketches, notes about Kajani's behavior and training. "No," she said firmly. "This stays with me until it's time." The next morning brought chaos disguised as concern. Margaret Baker stood on Sarah's lawn, flanked by two men in dark suits. Their vehicle bore the same emblem Dr. Mitchell had shown her part of Operation Guardian. "We need to talk about that animal," Margaret called. "These gentlemen have proof he's dangerous." Kajani stood at the front door like a stone lion, still but coiled. Sarah's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the dull, familiar ache of battle, long postponed. She stepped outside in her robe and boots, wind biting at her frail skin. "This is private property. Do you have a warrant?" One of the men moved his hand toward his jacket. "That dog is military property. He's a potential threat. To whom came Dr. Mitchell's voice from behind them. He strode up the walkway, holding papers. He's legally registered as her emotional support animal, and I have power of attorney. Any attempt to remove him would be interference with medical care. Sheriff Anderson stepped forward next, and in Hope Haven, that requires a court order. The suits hesitated. Sarah swayed on her feet. Kajani pressed into her side, steadying her. Fine, the shorter one muttered. But this isn't over. No, Sarah replied. It's just beginning. That night, as the town settled into uneasy quiet, Sarah laid out her affairs. She gave James the journal, now full of field notes, behavior logs, and a sealed envelope addressed to Colonel Marcus Hayes. If anything happens to me, she said, you get this to him. James looked down at the cover. Her handwriting was steady, intentional. You're not giving up, are you? Sarah shook her head. Not giving up. Just making sure the mission continues. Hours later, as thunder rolled across the mountains and icy rain painted the porch, Kajani growled low in his throat. Through the window, Sarah saw two men in suits questioning little Tommy Peterson on the street. She opened the door before they could approach. Talk to children again, she said coldly, and you'll be explaining yourselves to more than a sheriff. The men didn't reply, but they didn't leave either. Kajani stood at her side, silent and immovable, a sentinel in white fur. Whatever storm was coming, Sarah and her guardian were ready. The storm struck like a war drum. By nightfall, Hope Haven was paralyzed. Power lines snapped. Temperatures dropped below zero. The town's backup generators failed. Inside Sarah's home, silence settled, like a second snowfall. No hum of oxygen machines, no furnace rumble. Only breath, shallow and strained. Kajani nudged her awake. Her skin was pale, breath labored. In the dim emergency glow, he retrieved her medical bag and coat. No hesitation, no panic, only duty. Her voice rasped, barely audible. One last tour, old friend. He didn't answer. He simply waited by the door. Halfway to the nursing home, Sarah's strength flagged. Snow swirled in waves. Her legs buckled. Kajani pushed against her side, taking her weight. Then came Headlights' black SUV, the same one from the day before. You need to come with us, the taller man called from the window. For your safety. The other added with a smirk. Storm like this, no one would question a weather-related casualty. Sarah straightened. The nursing home needs help. Either assist us or get out of our way. Before they could respond more, Headlights pierced the snow. Sheriff Anderson's cruiser. Dr. Mitchell's SUV. You've got to be kidding me, James shouted over the wind. Sarah, what are you doing out here? Finishing what I started, she gasped. They made it to the nursing home just as conditions worsened. Inside, staff huddled in the dining hall with 28 residents, frail, bundled, frightened. The backup generator had failed here too. Kajani swept the room like a soldier, nose low, ears pricked. He stopped by each resident, lingering near the weakest, positioning himself where body heat would help most. A living blanket, a calming presence. Dr. Mitchell organized triage. Sarah directed medication doses between coughing fits memorized for years, summoned in seconds. But every breath cost her more. Then more Headlights. The SUVs. They burst through the entrance with armed escorts. The lead agent scanned the room. The dog comes with us. Now. Sarah pulled herself upright, every vertebra protesting. These people can't be moved. Not in this weather. He's a national security threat, the man snapped. No. She said, her voice sharp as shattered ice. He's the reason half this room is still alive. The room tensed. And then Margaret Baker entered. Snow clung to her coat. Her voice trembled, but didn't waver. My mother is in this room. That dog just saved her life. She turned to the agents. You take one step toward him, and you'll answer to every person in this town. Type next when you're ready for Part 4B, final chunk of confrontation. The air shifted. The suits froze, caught off guard by Margaret Baker, once their quietest ally, now standing against them, flanked by council members and longtime residents. Sheriff Anderson stepped forward, hand resting on his sidearm. "This is still my jurisdiction, and no one's removing anything from this building unless I see federal orders and a judge's signature." The taller agent glanced at his phone. "This isn't over." "No," Sarah whispered from her chair, her skin pallid, her lungs laboring. "But you've already lost." She collapsed. Dr. Mitchell caught her just in time. Kajani rushed to her side body, pressed tight against her like armor. The tension cracked. For a moment, even the suits looked human, startled, unsure. "She needs oxygen now," James barked, lifting her into a wheelchair. "She'll get it," Margaret said. "Our generator may be dead, but we're not helpless." The agents retreated, the storm swallowing their headlights. In the silence that followed, Hope Haven moved. Neighbors brought blankets. Staff stabilized the weakest patients. Kajani worked without command, guiding, supporting, even pulling small carts of supplies with improvised harnesses. No one questioned it anymore. He belonged here as surely as the wind belonged to the trees. By dawn, state police and a medical chopper arrived, led by Colonel Marcus Hayes. He stepped through the doors like a man reclaiming something sacred. Silver hair uniform crisp, despite the snow. His eyes scanned until they landed on Kajani. "So," he murmured, "you really did make it." He turned to Sarah, who lay on a gurney oxygen mask, trembling with each breath. "Ms. Thompson, I've read your journal. You saved a program we nearly lost to politics and greed. And you saved this town. Promise me," she whispered. "Don't take him away. He belongs here." Colonel Hayes didn't hesitate. "You have my word. Kajani's record will reflect honorable discharge." His new post, community guardian, Hope Haven. As medics prepared her for transport, Sarah turned to Kajani. "You completed your mission, old friend. Now it's time for mine." He placed his head gently on her bed, golden eyes full of unspoken goodbye. Outside, the storm faded. The first blue light of morning broke across the snow-covered porch. The legend of Hope Haven was no longer just a story. It had a face. It had a name. And it had 4 paws, firmly planted in the heart of a town that had remembered what it meant to stand together. At Maine Medical Center, the staff quickly realized Sarah Thompson was no ordinary patient. Her room, tucked deep in the ICU wing, became a quiet shrine to resilience. Cards from townspeople lined the windowsills. Tommy Peterson's crayon drawing of Kajani hung on the wall. To Miss Sarah Hope Haven's hero. Despite hospital policy, Dr. Mitchell arranged for Kajani to stay by her side. With Colonel Hayes's authorization and his newly minted credentials as a therapy dog, there were no more bureaucratic barriers. Just a silent guardian at the foot of her bed, eyes flicking to every shadow, ears twitching with each beeping monitor. When Sarah woke, it was often to the sound of his breathing. "You're still on duty," she murmured one afternoon, her fingers weak as they brushed his fur. "That's loyalty." Ellen Peterson came with fresh flowers and updates from town. "They're renaming the recreation room at the nursing home after you," she said, voice full of awe. The council voted unanimously. Sarah smiled faintly. Amazing what it takes to bring people together. Colonel Hayes visited that evening, his posture relaxed but eyes sharpened by decades of command. "The investigation is closed," he told her gently. "Your journal filled the gaps. We've arrested the contractors, and 2 more dogs have been recovered because of your work." Sarah nodded slowly, her breath shallow. "And Kajani?" Hayes glanced toward the shepherd who sat like a statue never far from her. "He stays. You have my word." Later, as the room dimmed with the golden light of sunset, Sarah asked for privacy. Kajani moved closer. "You knew," she whispered. That I needed you. Not just a protector, a purpose. She stroked his head, her breath catching. You gave me that. Her voice dropped even lower. Now I need you to do something even harder. Stay with them. Help them remember who they are. That's your new mission, soldier. Kajani's ears twitched. He leaned in, gently resting his head against her chest. He understood. Sarah Thompson passed away just before midnight. Dr. Mitchell marked the time with practiced hands, but his voice cracked as he made the final entry in her chart. Kajani, who had not moved from her bedside, let out a single, low whine, a sound that seemed to stretch through the sterile corridors and settle in every corner of the hospital. A final farewell. A soldier's grief. Outside her room, Colonel Hayes stood with Ellen Peterson and Sheriff Anderson. Through the glass, they watched as Kajani gently placed his head on Sarah's still hand. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He simply stayed silent, steadfast, unwilling to leave his post. In all my years of service, Hayes said softly, I've never seen loyalty like this. Not just from the dog, from her. Word traveled fast. By morning, flowers had begun to appear on Sarah's porch. Margaret Baker was among the first, standing silently, in her nightgown bouquet in hand. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. At the nursing home, Mrs. Henderson whispered prayers in Spanish and clutched her rosary. The recreation room was renamed the Sarah Thompson Memorial Center by unanimous vote. But Sarah's influence didn't stop at sentiment. Her will, updated just weeks earlier, was clear. Her home would become a medical outreach center for rural patients with rooms reserved for traveling nurses and doctors. Her savings established a fund for emergency care for the town's elderly, every detail accounted for. Her final letter, read aloud at an emergency council meeting, left no dry eyes. Kajani came to us as medicine, as kindness, and as a reminder. I leave him not to any individual, but to Hope Haven itself. Let him be your guardian, as he was mine. Let his presence remind you of the night we chose to stand together. Colonel Hayes stood before the council in full-dress uniform and presented Kajani's honorable discharge papers. His new designation was official, Post-Community Guardian, Hope Haven, Maine. That evening, as dusk blanketed the town, Kajani took his place on the porch. Sarah's porch. Residents passed quietly. Some paused to pet him. Others simply nodded. Tommy Peterson arrived last, holding a plastic container. Mom says you're staying with us tonight, he said, offering dinner. But you can come back here whenever you want. Miss Sarah would like that. Kajani didn't bark. He didn't whine. He stood, stepped down from the porch, and walked beside Tommy into the night mission, continuing. 1 week after Sarah's passing, the people of Hope Haven gathered inside her living room. Sunlight filtered through freshly washed windows, cleaned by volunteers who once feared crossing her gate. Now they sat in silence, surrounded by memories, her rocking chair, her garden boots, the kettle still warm from someone's nervous attempt to make tea. Dr. Mitchell stood at the hearth holding a thick manila envelope. Kajani sat at his feet still, and regal, his white coat gleaming in the light like armor. She left instructions for this meeting, James said quietly. These are her final journal entries, meant only to be shared once Operation Guardian was over. He opened the envelope and began to read. What I'm about to share isn't just about Kajani. It's about this town and what we allowed ourselves to become. When I first saw him bleeding in my yard, I recognized something, a warrior in need of a mission. But it wasn't just him who needed saving. It was us. The townspeople listened, breath held. Hope Haven forgot how to stand together. We traded unity for gossip, kindness, for suspicion. But this dog, this soldier, helped us remember. Margaret Baker wiped tears from her eyes as Dr. Mitchell read on. The journal recounted each transformation, how Wilson's pharmacy began stalking Kajani's favorite treats, how Ellen Peterson and her son brought soup and warmth, how old divides softened one small gesture at a time. They trained Kajani to detect threats to protect the vulnerable, but no one trained his heart. That was his to give, and he gave it to us. When the reading ended, silence filled the room. Then Colonel Hayes stood no longer in uniform, but carrying authority in every line of his weathered face. "She reached out to me months ago," he said, "but she asked me to wait, to let you rediscover yourselves before I intervened. And you did. She believed in this town more than any federal plan could." He turned to Kajani, and she believed in him. The room stirred soft murmurs of agreement rippling through once divided neighbors. On that day, something shifted again in Hope Haven, not because of what Sarah had written, but because everyone in the room realized she was right. Healing had already begun. Spring arrived in full bloom, as if Hope Haven itself had exhaled. Under Dr. Mitchell's guidance, Sarah's home transformed into the Hope Haven Community Medical Center. Contractors, many working at reduced rates, preserved its Victorian beauty, while adding exam rooms, overnight quarters for visiting nurses, and a children's clinic named after her grandchildren. The porch remained untouched. Each evening, Kajani returned to that spot lying across the threshold, as if guarding her memory. People stopped to visit, some with flowers, others with stories. Children left drawings. Veterans stood in silence. But this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. At the next town council meeting, Margaret Baker stood at the podium with a thick binder in hand. Sarah's letter made something painfully clear. She began, "We lost ourselves, but we're here now not because of policy or money, but because a woman dying of cancer chose to fight for all of us, and because a dog reminded us what loyalty really looks like." Unanimously, the council approved the Hope Haven Renewal Plan grants for local businesses, expanded public services, and funding for emergency care, all seeded by Sarah's estate. In a ceremony held on Memorial Day, Colonel Hayes presented Kajani with an engraved medallion. For continued service to the people of Hope Haven, he read aloud, and for exemplary conduct in defense of life, community, and compassion. Kajani stood still, tail low, as if understanding the weight of the moment. That evening, as lanterns flickered on porches and laughter echoed down Main Street, Kajani lay at the base of the town's new welcome sign, Hope Haven Home of Guardian Hearts. Beside him sat Tommy Peterson, one hand on his fur, reading aloud from a picture book. "You can come stay with us whenever," Tommy whispered, "but I think this is where you really belong." Kajani didn't move. He didn't need to. His mission had changed, but it had never ended. He wasn't just guarding a house or a widow or even a town. He was guarding the soul of a community that had finally remembered what it meant to love without fear and to stand together when it mattered most.